Yesterday, May 11th, Shanghai Disneyland began its phased reopening of the park. And on May 20th, they've announced that Disney Springs, the shopping district at Walt Disney World, will begin its phased reopening. And we're beginning to hear from the Disney Parks blog and the quarterly earnings report what reopening might look like for Disneyland in California and Walt Disney World in Florida. And we're going to talk about all of that in this video. Hey there, my name's Eric D, and on this channel my goal is always to help make your next Disney adventure a little bit more magical with food reviews, tips and tricks, and news. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss anything. And I'm very excited about this video because over the past week or so, we've been getting some news out of Disney that seems like the winds might be changing from what we've been experiencing for the past 2 months or so with everything going on with the parks being shut down. And so we're going to talk all about that. From the recent quarterly earnings call to investors, Bob Chapek made it clear that it's still too early to predict when Disney will be reopening all of their operations, but they are evaluating a number of different scenarios. And these scenarios will all ensure a cautious, sensible, and deliberate approach to reopening the parks. He went on to explain that this approach is looking at a number of factors including guest capacity, density control measures such as social distancing, health and prevention procedures like having cast members and guests wear masks, and temperature screenings. As I previously mentioned, Shanghai Disneyland reopened yesterday. We can already see how Disney is applying these guest capacity, these social distancing, and these health measures in that park. And that may give us an idea of how they're going to apply it in the US parks. And one thing that they did to prepare guests for these new changes at Shanghai Disneyland is they provided a video to let guests know what's going to be happening. So throughout this video, I'm going to be showing clips of that video so you can kind of get a visual idea of what we're talking about. For guest capacity, Bob Chapek revealed that the capacity for Shanghai Disneyland is usually 80,000 a day. And it's pretty surprising that he revealed this because Disney is usually very tight-lipped on what their capacity is, but I think since it's such an unusual time, he was willing to share that information. But the government has asked Disney to begin opening with just 30% capacity, so that's 24,000 guests a day. But Disney is actually opening Shanghai Disneyland below what the government asked to make sure that they're ready to go and feeling comfortable with everything. So they'll eventually work up to that 30% capacity, and then as conditions continue to improve and the government approves it, they can increase that capacity. Disney is going to manage this capacity by having dated tickets for specific days, and for annual passes, a reservation system, so you can't simply show up and expect to get in the parks. For density control measures, they're going to have the queues to enter the park clearly marked, so you are maintaining social distancing at all times. Also inside attraction queues, they will have social distancing areas marked. And depending on the attractions, they may not be filling up the attraction vehicle to full capacity if they can't maintain social distancing standards at full capacity. In restaurants, they'll also be identifying which tables you can and can't eat at to make sure they're keeping the groups separated. Also, characters will be seen at a distance and not close up for meet and greets. Moving on to the health screenings, before guests enter the park, they will walk through a health screening area where monitors will actually take their temperature as they walk through. So there's no thermometer required, no swipe on the forehead. The monitoring system actually takes care of all of that. And all cast members and guests will be required to wear masks throughout their visit to Shanghai Disneyland, other than when they're eating. They also gave the example of their Buzz Lightyear attraction that they will be providing disposable gloves for, since the attraction requires hands-on interaction. And of course they'll have hand sanitizer at the end of each attraction. So that is currently what the experience is looking like at Shanghai Disneyland. I know that's very different than what we're used to, but definitely they are playing it safe here, which is a smart thing because I don't think guests would feel safe otherwise, and I don't think it would be safe for cast members otherwise. So this is probably the best way to keep things going if they are going to open up the parks. But yeah, definitely different not being able to run up there and meet Mickey. So you can start to think about how this might apply to the parks in the US. And while we currently don't have a date for Disneyland or Walt Disney World to open, it does seem like we're going to see a lot of these same changes coming to those parks. Because recently on the Disney Parks blog, there was a post by Disney's chief medical officer. She highlighted several things, such as a phased reopening, including a gradual reopening or partial reopening of certain locations, for example, the opening of retail and dining locations prior to the opening of our theme parks. So like they're doing with Disney Springs on May 20th. She also brought up physical distancing and capacity measures, like we talked about with Shanghai Disneyland. She talked about additional cleanliness measures that Disney would be taking. Also, she talked about screening and prevention support. And she also talked about additional cast member training that would be given. One thing that I thought was very interesting, specifically related to physical distancing and capacity measures, Dr. Heimel said, "As you can imagine, managing guest density in queues, restaurants, hotels, ride vehicles, and other facilities throughout the parks and across the resort is a major focus. As we implement the physical distancing guidelines based on guidance from health authorities such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and appropriate government agencies, this will likely include implementing of guest capacity measures to comply with state and federal guidelines. We're also exploring ways to use technology to aid in these efforts, like with our Play Disney Parks app and through virtual queues at Disneyland and Walt Disney World." So it will be very interesting to see how Disneyland and Walt Disney World use virtual queues in the future. Since they've already done that with Rise of the Resistance, what will that look like in the future? How will that work with guests? I'm interested to see that, but I think that will be a great option to reduce the amount of contact you're having with guests and also reduce that close contact you're having as you're waiting in long lines for very popular attractions. Also important to note, when Disney Springs reopens on May 20th, it will be a phased reopening. A limited number of shopping and dining experiences that are owned by third-party operating participants will begin to open during this initial phase. So it's not necessarily like the World of Disney or Disney-owned restaurants. It's those third-party operating stores that are going to open first, and there are going to be limits on how many people can be in there. So it's going to be interesting how they roll that out, and I'm sure they're going to be using that information to help inform how they're going to open the parks. While we don't know when Disneyland and Walt Disney World are going to reopen, we keep having little hints. When they announced that it was indefinitely closed, they were still accepting reservations from June 1st on. Well, they've stopped accepting reservations for the month of June. They're telling people that those reservations are currently still good, but they're not accepting any new ones. They're now accepting them from July 1st on. So that's probably not looking good, at least for the first half of June in my mind. Once again, this is just me speculating. The last thing I wanted to touch on is how the past month and a half, 2 months, have affected the future of the parks when it comes to construction and future projects. Because for the past month and a half, pretty much all the construction that had been going on, which there was a ton going on both at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, was completely stopped. And that was, for Disneyland and Walt Disney World fans like me, that was of course hard to see. Of course, we totally understand why it needed to be done, but that's one of those hard things where it's like, oh, we were so excited for these things to open. So Avengers Campus, which was going to open on July 18th, they've now removed July 18th opening date. It's now just coming soon. Other things for Walt Disney World that were planned to be open, those are now being delayed also. And so the question is, how far are those being delayed? One bit of good news we received last week from the Orange County Register is that a skeleton crew of construction workers have returned for Avengers Campus and Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway at Disneyland. So it's great to hear there are a few construction workers on those projects again, but definitely not going full steam ahead yet. Just because those two projects we know are still moving forward, that doesn't mean everything is good to go, because on the earnings call, Disney made it clear that the loss of revenue from the parks and other arms of business has been dramatic over just the past month and a half. To try and help reduce losses, Disney is basically planning to take $900 million they plan to spend this year on capital expenditures, like construction on new projects and refurbishments going on in Walt Disney World and Disneyland. $900 million of those dollars, they're going to basically put that on hold. And hopefully next fiscal year, they're going to be able to restart on those projects and invest money on them again. If the economy improves, if things are going again, if tourism is improving, they'll be able to start on those projects. But just as if you were doing work on your house and then you lost a bunch of revenue for a period of time, you might stop on some of those projects and say, we're going to look at that in a few months. That's basically what Disney's doing. Once again, that's hard for us as Disney fans to see, but it's totally understandable from a business point. On some message boards and in some Twitter threads where people were talking about these things, when that $900 million price tag was talked about, I was hearing from some people that they basically thought, you know what, all these projects are dead. But I wanted to focus in on one thing that Bob Chapek said on the earnings call that gives me some hope for these projects going forward, even though they might be put on hold for a period of time. And before I play this clip from him, which I think is very interesting to listen to, as I was going into this, just in my mind, I was like, you know what? Everything they say about Bob is that he loves the intellectual property Disney has. He loves to stick that intellectual property in the park, and he really, kind of loves to get that in there. So to me, my hope was like for the big e-ticket Avengers Campus attraction that is probably on hold right now, I'm still thinking that's coming down the line just because I can see Bob being like, you know what? Endgame was the biggest movie of all time for Avengers. Marvel has some of the biggest movies of all time. Yes, we need to get more of that in the park. We can't do it right now, but we're going to do it in a few years' time. I can see him saying the same thing for some things in Walt Disney World, but listen to this clip, and in the comments below, let me know what you think about it.
In terms of the CapEx question, obviously we had a lot of really big plans in the parks, and we still continue to have big plans. Those good ideas before COVID are going to be really good ideas after. And as Christine said in her opening remarks, there are certain, trimmings that we're doing here and there to be responsible from a financial standpoint. But we have such great intellectual property, and our Imagineers over at our theme parks, where the majority of our capital goes, have done such a tremendous job of planning out future experiences for our guests that we're just going to go ahead and take a slightly finer tooth comb, if you will, through those expenditures, but essentially plan on, investing behind those businesses like we always have.
So once again, I know you can look at that from a half glass empty point of view of, oh, he said we're going to take a fine tooth comb to it. But to me, he's saying, you know what, we've already spent time and money with the Imagineers creating these ideas. Yeah, we do need to go through the budgets and make sure, do we need all of these details in here? Is there anything we can cut along the way? But we've already spent time on this. Let's invest in it, just not today. So that's my hope there, that we still get to see those things in the future. So hopefully we will. Let me know in the comments below what you think. So there was a ton in this video. I want to know what you're thinking down below, whether it's about Shanghai reopening and kind of the safety procedures they're doing there, how you think that will impact the US parks. Also with Disney Springs opening on May 20th, do you think you're going to be there? Are you feeling comfortable going out, or is that something that you're still going to wait a while? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you're doing great. Hopefully you're staying safe. As always, if you found this video helpful, please give a like. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see y'all again real soon. Bye.